Hello, is this working? Yes. I decided to not show any slides. Can you imagine that? A designer who's not going to show any slides? We have at the D School, we have a no PowerPoint, rule. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, but I also wanted to spend as much time taking your questions as possible. I've heard this stuff before that I'm about to say, but I haven't heard what you're interested in. So hopefully I'll talk for a very short time, and then we'll open it up to you for questions. But I wouldn't want to miss this. You know, it's such a great time for design, for designers, for creative people. You know, most of my career, I felt like I was at the kids' table. You know, that the CEOs and those guys were in the real meeting. You know, the thing that was really going on, or the university faculty was in the real meeting, and I was the design person. And every once in a while, somebody'd walk over to the kids' table and say, "Where can I get shoes like that?" You know, that was my role for the higher-ups. Was, where do you get those glasses, right? But that's not the case today. I mean, we are center stage and working on the most important and most strategic problems in the world. And at the university, I mean, I actually had the university president come up to me and say, "You can have all the money you want, just make all Stanford students confident in their creative ability." I mean, that's different than where'd you get those shoes, you gotta admit, right? As far as my importance at the importance of design and that thing. So I've never really, in my life, I'm not a competitive person at all in anything. I've never really thought it was my role to promote IDEO. There's plenty of people in the audience. Fred's dust right there. That's his job to promote IDEO. But so my whole career, I've talked about design and its importance and how I thought it was underserved. I mean, I really think of my job as making design more important in the world, and that's what I go around doing. So at first, how I got into this was I was an engineer. But I was in love with industrial design. I just didn't have the talent or the training or whatever you want to say. And so I started a company that would help industrial design companies, keep the exciting part of their products all the way through to manufacture. And what normally happens if you were an industrial designer in those days was you'd come up with this beautiful, magical thing, and I do think design is magical. Out of nowhere comes this picture of the future that nobody else could have come up with. And so I try to keep the exciting bits of that. My company would try to keep the exciting bits of that as it was, instead of having it compromised away, which is what normally happened. It was like, it's much easier if we don't make that square, if we painted a color we already have, it was that kind of mentality. And so we as engineers tried to make that happen. But we were super design sensitive, and I remember that the turning point for me to move from thinking of myself as an engineer to thinking of myself as some kind of designer, not the same kind as, Dieter Rams, but I was the head of one of the most important industrial design firms in the world actually said to me, "We do the design, what do you do?" And that broke my heart when he said, we do the design, what do you do? Because I do design, but it was just a different kind of design, right? A different definition of design. And so from that point forward, I started trying to change what design was to make it more inclusive of more and more people, right? So the first thing happened that I merged with some industrial design firms, and with my good friend Bill Moggridge. I miss him every day. And so we've built this firm that was more holistic, that was doing strategy work, that was doing experiences and services in addition to doing product design, which is what we called ourselves at first. So we moved to that. And so design became bigger and more inclusive. And then Bill Moggridge had this lovely notion. One day he came into my office and said, you know, I think this design of this digital stuff is way too important to leave it to the software engineers. We have to take this over. And he called what he wanted to do soft face. I'm still not sure what that has to do with anything. It quickly became interaction design, but Bill always had funny names for things. And so once he started that, and we started focusing on that, and then came anthropologists, and pretty soon design meant making impact in the world, right? Not designing a new podium or table, right? And so that felt really good because I really think that design has something to say. You know, it has some way to routinely come up with ideas that are new to the world, right? And that is really important. So what happened then was, so we're over here having a good time, you know, cute, you know, like, and I'd go to do something and they'd say, you're cute, but like, let's talk to the CEOs, you know. And then it's gradually moved away from that. One of the big impacts was this IBM study that was 1,500 CEOs, and they asked them, what's the most important thing in your company? This is worldwide, 1,500 CEOs. And they said, the most important thing in the company is to be more creative, to routinely innovate, right? To come up with things, instead of just selling a revised version of what we had last year, coming up with breakthrough ideas. Doesn't that sound like us? So that switch has made us have to become more mindful of our process. And so we started talking about design as design thinking, not taking away at all from design, just saying that the frame, the mindset that we use to talk about these things, to come up with new ideas, is design thinking. And I've been saying that for years. I would say, like, my students at Stanford are not particularly world-class at the artistic part, and they're not particularly world-class at the technical part. They're more generalists in the sense of how do you come up with ideas. And so I used to say, when they would complain that, you know, my portfolio doesn't look like it came from Art Center, and I can't do fourth order differential equations in my head like my other engineering friends, like, you know, what am I? And I said, no, you're an expert at design process. And somehow it just didn't go anywhere. I don't know. And we're doing the same thing exactly. And we started saying, no, it's design thinking. It's a way of thinking. It's a mindset. And for some reason that took off. Right? And so from then on, we started taking on projects where the fact that we could codify, the fact that we could talk about what we were going to do, and that the people, our clients, were realizing that we were going to come up with something that they couldn't come up with, right? That was it always surprised me when an IDEO would win a big job over some more, you know, obviously business savvy company, and we'd win the job, not all the time, but when I went to see the CEO and I'd say, why'd you pick us? And he said, you know, if I hired this other firm, I kind of know what they would come up with. I went to Harvard Business School, they went to Harvard Business School, I kind of know what they would come up with. I got no freaking clue what you guys are going to come up with, right? And that's where we wanted them to be, right? Because we want to paint a picture of the future with our new ideas in it. And then, so now we have this mindset, we have this process, we have the big win of design thinking was literally that it was a human-centered process that people would sign up to work together on. At Stanford, we must have started for 20 years talked about multidisciplinary teams working together. We talked about it. We would go to these meetings, we'd fight a bit, and we'd leave and say, I'm never going back to that meeting again, you know? And so what happened was that design thinking as a human-centered process is so acceptable to different kinds of people that the end result was we could get a doctor and an opera singer and a philosopher and a business person to actually adopt it as their process, and then they could build on each other's ideas. And if you can get that diversity of thinkers and you can get them to work together and build on each other's ideas, you're definitely going to come up with new to the world stuff, right? And so that was the big win of design thinking, that it was human-centered enough that basically everybody would sign up to use it, because it's building empathy for people and trying to understand what's meaningful to people, and everybody signs up to that. If you want to soften up one of these tough people, start talking about their children. That's what's meaningful to them, right? And so we're able to do that. So anyway, what happened from there? It just exploded into the kind of projects that we were hired to do, that we could hired at IDEO, or that we were allowed to do at the D School. Big, change the world kind of stuff. My favorite project that IDEO's done recently that exemplifies how you actually use this process the best that I know of is we looked at improving the lunch experience at San Francisco Unified School District. 53,000 lunches are served a day there. And so, as usual, we go in and with guns blazing, but what we're really doing is looking at what's meaningful to these kids, and it's pretty clear that the kids have not been in the design equation before, right? And the process of them, you don't just go in and ask the kids what they want. In fact, we do that, of course, and the kids say, if you just start serving ice cream from the minute we get in the room till we leave, that'd be a perfect lunch. But you don't. When you get in and you start watching them and understanding, you start to see that lunch is not about food. We were thinking we'd go in there and it'd be like, make better food. Turns out the food's actually quite good. It's done by a company called Revolution Foods, which makes really fantastic food for schools. So it wasn't about the quality of the food at all. But what you find out really quickly is, when you use this kind of understanding of the students, is that it's about socialization at lunch. I mean, I've been fooling around going to these classes all day, and I haven't been with my friends, and I get to lunch and I really want to have a good time. I really want to be with my friends. And so, but the way we got it set up now, you come in, you stand in a line, you may waste most of the time that you're there kind of standing in line waiting to get your food. And there's, the person in the back kind of putting the food out. And so, to make a long story short, once you decided to design in this holistic way, and that you will design the experience that is meaningful to students, you say, okay, let's make it a great socialization experience. So what we do now basically is there's a big tables, and you come in, you sit with your friends right away, you get going and whatever you got to catch up in what you need to talk about and hang out. And the food, using the students, involving the students and the people who used to be behind the wall giving the food, you serve the food family style. And here's the big win. So all these schools, these public schools, have this kind of federally mandated thing where if you get enough fruits and vegetables on their plates, that they then they're paid for, right? The subsidy's paid for. But it turns out that they don't measure whether they eat them or not. So here's the big win of the new plan, which is that they come in, they sit with their friends, they're hungry, we serve the fruits and vegetables first. They eat them. What a deal. Somehow, so I'll go off, and I'll try not to, but I sometimes go off on things called bird walks, into different places and so on. So I'm going to avoid that, but I wanted to right there. Anyway, so then once you do it, you can just come. If you kind of look at the journey that the kid goes through at lunch, you can pick all those little points in the journey and make each one of them extraordinary. So you look at how they pay for lunch, and they pay for lunch, and there's a stigma associated with whether you're on the food subsidy or whether you're paying. So you go to a system that just has a card, and you swipe the card. Nobody knows whether you're paying or whether you're not paying, right? Completely. It goes on from there. Most of these projects, which are really this deep that IDEO gets involved, there's a moment, and the team's telling me about this moment while they're standing there, and one of the little boys is putting food in his backpack, and you're not allowed to put food in the backpack, that's not a thing. And the principal goes up to the little boy and says, I'm sorry, Johnny, you can't take food out of the cafeteria. What are you doing? And he says, my mother's hungry. So now guess what? We have a project about, how do we make meals that are in little boxes that you can take home to your family as a part of the food subsidy program. Anyway, think about that kind of project. I used to put plastic boxes around computers exclusively, right? Now, I thought I was going to be happy with that, for the rest of my life. I didn't know any better. It was great. And every once in a while we'd get a chair or a toothpaste tube. It was going to be great. But now if you go to IDEO's website and see the kind of project we're working on, or go to the D School and look at the stuff we're doing in poverty in Africa and India, or it's just amazing. Anyway, so that's where we are. The next thing that happened to me basically was that I realized that everybody was creative. I used to really think, like ad agencies have the creatives and the not creatives. I kind of had that worldview a little bit, but I started to realize as the D School started to take off, I noticed that the kids in the classes were all creative. I mean, if you just got them in the right mindset, right? And then just like in kindergarten when everybody was creative, what happened along the way is they opted out of thinking of themselves as creative. Somebody told them that's a terrible picture of a horse, that they've drawn. That's really about talent or about artistic ability. That's not whether they're creative or not. They could be a great pianist. We don't know, right? But so at the D School, we didn't have to teach creativity. We didn't. It was there. All we had to do was remove the blocks that these people had. And it became kind of like, it became clear that they had fears. Like everybody's wildly creative in kindergarten, and sometime they opt out of it, and by the time they get to adulthood, it's kind of like fixed in that thing, and they think of themselves as not creative. But it turns out that they are, and you turn them on, and it's unbelievable. So the method that we use to get to this point of creative confidence, hence the title of the book, is guided mastery. We realized that we had to hold their hands. So I'm sitting there thinking in my body that I'm not a creative person. It turns out that if we hold your hand and give you a little success, and then give you a little greater success, right? By the time you get over here somewhere, you think of yourself as a creative person. I used to have, I've been taught at Stanford for 35 years, and so it's been kind of fun. At the end of the school year, one of your students who's particularly fond of you will bring their parents up to you and say, oh, Professor Kelley, this is my dad. All kinds of things are unveiled at that moment. Like the dad's, got a beer belly and a ponytail, and he's Grateful Dead t-shirt, and then you realize why the girl is named Anemone for the first time. Never occurred to me before. So from that feeling of a few students coming up and thanking me for being their professor, to literally hundreds of students in my office, one at a time, not a whole group, crying about how good it feels to be a creative person in their body. And they really quickly go to some biological reason. I mean, they can't just believe that everybody's creative. They said, I always knew I was creative. My uncle was an architect. I'm not even sure you get any of your uncle's genes. I'm not quite sure how to. But I always knew that, My mother was a dancer, so I knew I was creative, right? And so it's just so exciting as a professor to see their eyes sparkle as they go out into the world. Now, if you really want to understand this stuff, reading my brothers in my book is like, that's a nice read on an airplane. But if you really want to understand this stuff, the psychologist that is the pioneer in this area is named Albert Bandura. If you saw my TED Talk, I talked a bit about him and his cure of snakes. You see this? So we're trying to get rid of the fear of being judged. he's trying to get rid of the fear of things like snakes and spiders. He uses the same process. He holds their hand and moves them, look through the two-way mirror, see your friends can touch a snake and nothing happens, you move down the thing. We're doing the same thing by opening people up in that way. So, but Bandura's work, what we call creative confidence, he calls self-efficacy. Self-efficacy. So if you have a psychology student, I'll bet you had to read about self-efficacy. I try to get through the book. I'm more of I'd rather like build the Taj Mahal out of toothpicks than read a book, to tell you the truth, in myself. But it's pretty thick, but his notion is exactly where we are, which is that self-efficacy is defined as that you kind of have a sense of the world, and you have a sense of your place in it, and that you believe that you can achieve what you set out to do, right? Isn't that lovely? Think about that, how different that feels from most people's lives, right? That you have that sense that you can do what you set out to do. And that's what's happening, is that designers are now asked to do that we're out there in the world doing things that matter. I told one IDEO story, so I'm going to tell one Stanford D School story. So the students, we have a class called Extreme Affordability. We have lots D School has 23 classes. I'll say a word about the D School. This will be my birdwalk, D School. So the D School is this fabulous place because everybody who's there wants to be there. Think about that different compared to some of my other classes where it's a required chemistry class. Nobody wants to be there, right? Well, chemists do, I guess. But at the D School, it's totally opt-in. That's the thing about the culture. Whatever anybody tells you about the D School, here's the big deal. Opt-in. It's at a university. Everybody wants to be there. I don't pay the professors. So if you want to be a professor at the D School, teach a class at the D School, you got to figure out how to pay for it yourself. Either overload it on your schedule or have your department sanction it in some way. Most of the classes are not for credit, or half of them are not for credit, right? And nobody gets a degree. Why the hell would you go there, right? Right? Unless the stuff that was going on there was extraordinary, unless we were doing stuff that really mattered, unless it felt really good to be there. And that's the big thing about the D School. So there's many classes, there's pop-ups, we teach in completely different ways. If I can get a big shot to come in and teach, 2 Saturdays in a row, that's a class, right? So, and we have the normal 10-week quarter classes. So we have a class called Extreme Affordability, and Extreme Affordability is doing all kinds of, I could tell you about, all the different projects that are going on. We have classes that look like law school classes, improving the way you search for, so all these classes have people from different disciplines who've come up with the ideas. It's not, in the class that the lawyers are center in, the other people, we don't let anybody in the class, each class is made up of a diverse group, right? So, anyway, we're looking at health in these countries where there's a lot of death due to low birth weight, meaning you're out in a remote village, a baby's born, the baby can't keep warm in order to survive, basically, because there's just no way to do that out there. So they can't maintain birth weight. So we start looking at incubators, and so we go into, the funny thing is you go into the hospitals, and there's plenty of incubators. I mean, not plenty, but they cost $20,000, and there's a few in there, but nobody's there. And the reason is that's not where the babies are. If you look pretty carefully, the babies are out, way out in the villages. So this team of Stanford students, the company they made a company. It's now called Embrace. And there was a ABC News special said they'll probably save 300,000 lives a year with their very simple product. That's basically a sleeping bag with a paraffin liner in it that you heat up, and then you can heat up with hot water out wherever you are, and then you can maintain the baby's birth weight. But this is things that they came up with by looking at the problem with a design lens. rather than what other lens was used to decide that we needed $20,000 incubators in hospitals where the babies weren't. So it just keeps going like that. It has a lot to do with understanding what's the problem. I mean, so much of the world is focused on problem solving, and we're good at that, and we should keep working on problem solving. But we really believe that the designer's task is trying to understand what's a problem that's worth working on, what's a non-obvious need that's out there in the world, and then we'll innovate around that, right? So another class at Stanford called Liberation Technologies, they're going in Africa and they're going to look at fires. They're somehow sponsored at looking at fires. And they get out into the villages and they find people are afraid of fires, but what they're really afraid of is losing their documents. That's what they're really afraid of, is their documents being lost. You know, in our culture, yes, if you lose your driver's license, you have to go through the pain of going to the DMV, and that's pretty nasty. But not like not with the level that these people are worried about losing their documents, which shows they're allowed to be in this country, they're allowed to, you know, squat in this house or whatever it is. But it's really important. So as usually happens, when you go and look at things in a holistic way, you reframe the problem to something that's really worth working on. So they found out that fires were interesting, but what was really important was getting them comfortable with that their documents were secure. So these people started, this student group started a company that goes around with computers and scans documents. Completely different than fire prevention, right? But it's the solution that made a difference in that community. Now everybody's documents in all these communities are uploaded to the cloud, and they can be pulled down anytime that they're needed, right? By anybody, right? Anyway, so it's a world. I'm old. I could have retired and missed this whole design renaissance thing that's going on, but I'm glad I didn't. It's an exciting time. We're being asked, creative people are being asked to work on really important problems, you know, the problems that matter in the world. And the good news is we're coming up with new to the world solutions. And so it's a really good time to be a designer. And I think I'll stop there and take some questions.